Up next, we consider whether the rise in caffeine consumption, whether through energy drinks or coffee and tea beverages, and the deaths that seem to be coming from that is something that society needs to take a closer look at. All right, Tunde, we've seen some discussions and research reports and so forth in health magazines, Men's Health and so forth, Women's Health, talking about the increase in caffeine consumptions and specifically like with energy drinks and pre-workout powders, which coincides with also the rise in the consumption in caffeine and coffee and tea and so forth. But that there's been an observed increase amongst young people, even with heart attacks and things, that seem to be coming from or associated with this increase in caffeine use. So what do you make of this? Like, is this something where, is this just alarmist? I mean, you're trying to sell, health people always tell us that, either we got one simple fix or, hey, everything you're doing is wrong. Or is this something we should be looking at if you got, people in their 20s and 30s having heart attacks?
Yeah, I think we should be looking at it. I mean, just like you said, 28-year-old dying of a fatal heart attack isn't normal. Now, in defense of caffeine, you and I didn't do an autopsy on this young lady. So we don't, in the articles we read, didn't talk about, did she have any other health concerns or things that could have added to maybe her being susceptible more to a heart attack having consumed.
Well, but this is beyond that, there's an ongoing, and you shared with me a couple of things that there's talking about this ongoing look at there, and we'll have these in the show notes where he's referencing a particular 28-year-old woman, but there's been lots of reports of, of these type of outcomes that arise from, and really what you're looking at is a lot of times is the quantity of caffeine. Like when you push an energy drink, you might have, if the recommended daily limit is 400 milligrams of caffeine, you'll have energy drinks and stuff. I think Panera had to stop selling something. It had like 300 and something milligrams of caffeine in it. Like, whoa, like that's
funny. We can put it in the show notes. I don't know if you saw, I sent you last night because I just Googled it out of curiosity, the average, like what's the average caffeine in energy drinks, or the caffeine milligrams in the average energy drink. And it was a cool diagram that had all the top sellers like Monster and Red Bull and all that stuff. And I would say the lowest one I saw, I think, was 80 milligrams per serving, and the highest was around 380.
Yeah. And a cup of coffee is like 90, just for reference. So you're talking about 4 cups of coffee versus you could slam one of these drinks and you might be there, it's just like, oh my gosh.
Well, and that's the thing, I think, which is just interesting, like, because it goes back to like we're talking about, James, the combination of things in our new era of this kind of modern stuff with this technology is the proliferation of information, whether it's good or bad information. And then again, the kind of distrust in traditional authority, like traditional doctors and science and all that stuff. And then I think, like we've talked about in things when it comes to the economy, or even the first part of the show about vaccines. I mean, the human body's complex. All this stuff is complex. So I think especially for younger people, because it's funny, James, I texted my 26-year-old son last night after I was reading this article, because, it's funny how real life is. I'm driving this kid's car yesterday. It's funny. I got to ask my son to drive the car that I bought. So that's a whole nother discussion. But I'm driving a car and I just look in the middle thing, where the drink holder, and he's got this little organic energy drink, and it's empty because the kid, he works out and he does MMA and all that. He's in shape. So I text him. I text him the article about the young lady who unfortunately died with a heart attack. And I was like, hey man, be careful with this stuff. And then he tells me, I don't drink energy drinks. And I'm like, dude, I just saw it in your car. So it's even, I'm thinking, because young people, I'm thinking like, maybe my son doesn't even recognize the definition of an energy drink. Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah, because a lot of times they're marketed, and that with some in the show notes we'll have, it talks about how they're marketed as health drinks.
Exactly.
Like, and we got a bunch of B vitamins and all this other stuff, and it's actually, but the only thing you're really feeling is the caffeine.
Now his thing was like, it said, not him, but the bottle, it said organic and ginger stuff and all that. And again, the definition of organic we know is loose. And that's what I was thinking, James, is especially for young people, because you're right. Somebody his age that works. I mean, I see the kid drinks maybe 2-3 cups of coffee in the morning before going to work. And then you're right. If someone like him's drinking 3 or 4 of these a day, these energy drinks, next thing you know, you got 1,000 milligrams of caffeine. And if you're doing that for years, your blood pressure, other things are going to be affected. And I think there's so much stuff in our ecosystem now outside of our bodies that is just, we don't even know half the stuff that's going in our body. It's interesting.
Well, I mean, if you care to know, you can know, to some degree. But I think that the thing that really hit me with this is just people love their drugs, like people, especially stimulants, like the caffeine thing. Like we talked about this years ago, talking about how most of the world's population, because caffeine's half-life is more than, it stays in your system more than a day. Like most of the world's population or adult population at least, is like, has caffeine in their system at all times. And so it's just like, what would the world look like if that wasn't the case? So, and then you look at like nicotine, stuff like that, and just all the creative ways, like used to people smoked, but then that's, society wide, you got people dying from secondhand smoking, all that. So now they got the patches and they got all this stuff that, people still figure out a way to get their nicotine. So it's just, and it's kind of like, remember, if you go back 100 something years when Coca-Cola was first, created, it had cocaine in it, in the first 20 years or so, it was kept cocaine in there. And like, so it's just like, we like that kind of stuff as people, and then even if you want to go to the more natural side, like in certain parts of the world, they chew coca leaves, which is not as refined and so forth, but it still gives you that little bit of a boost. And so I think that's just hardwired in us. We like that, and so the issue that you have to get to is, I think I look at least differently, the issue of caffeine when it's in like tea or coffee, versus when you're talking about these energy drinks, because like the energy drinks, it's going to be an exaggeration for the point of for the purposes of making the point. But the energy drink is like, doing a bump of cocaine versus the coffee being like chewing a coca leaf. Like you're having the stimulant in a more purified and concentrated form, because like I said, you have a cup of coffee, it's going to, 90 something grams or something like that. And it's warm, so you drink it slower and so forth like that. Or even if it's iced coffee, the quantity versus one can of something or one serving of some energy drink might be twice or three times that. And so, and with drinks, you can put them down really fast. And then also the other thing I'll mention here, and because this looks like you talked about how it's the combination of things. Well, what you said there reminded me when we were younger, ephedra, and was a thing for a few years, for some time. And then it got outlawed and people were having adverse health outcomes with that, heart related and stuff as well. And one of the big things there was that, and I remember this, there were supplements that had ephedra plus the caffeine. And so you'd be in there really like, you'd be in the gym, like, really banging it out. And ephedra was effective. Like ephedra was good for fat loss and good for all these different things, but people were dying. And so like that guy, I don't think they're going to outlaw caffeine, but it is just like, it's one of those things that, yes, the quantity and the concentration of it. And then like you mentioned, if it's being mixed in with anything else that may also, stimulate it or create some other effect. And then over time, these things can wear your body down faster is kind of the thing that you look at with that.
Yeah, it's interesting because as you're talking, it makes me think about things like the downside of these things. Like, somebody taking one of these energy shots. There's an interesting example you gave between the natural form of something like a coca leaf versus the purified, refined form of the powder of cocaine, and the difference. Like, and it's reminds me of like when we talked about, the technology that allowed the refining and distilling of hard liquor in the 1800s. Yeah. And it's just the difference that created and how people behave. I mean, it's just, and then like you're saying, then the health effects,
we did the show on the Prohibition documentary.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It was fascinating because think about it.
People were drinking, like wine and beer. Yeah. It was different than when they started drinking hard liquor.
Hard liquor. And then he's saying also the health effects, right? Cirrhosis of the liver, brain stuff going on that all is caused more by hard liquor than by even heart issues. Than by wine and beer. And then what did that do? It's a great point you bring up because it helps me even further go through my thought here, because what did we learn in the Prohibition documentary? Again, another plug for people, go back in our library and watch that show, is that the women's suffrage movement, which culminated in the women constitutional right to vote in 1920, began in the mid 1800s because of the conditions of wives around the country dealing with men who now were slaves to the bottle, to the moonshine and to the liquor and all that. And it's amazing how that cascades, right? Because the women's suffrage movement, the need for that didn't seem to be the same prior to the distilling of this technology of distilling liquor a certain way in the early to mid 1800s. So it's so I'm thinking about, James, what it makes me think about is like the effects of caffeine, but then I wrote down other things: Adderall, Xanax. We're talking about people, especially young people, put all this stuff in their body a lot, like you said, like ephedrine was, because of the competitive nature of things like corporate America or school and the study and all
because
that.
they work. Like that's the thing. Like it's not like some placebo. Like these things do what they are sold to do.
But like you're saying about they work, but then they have these side effects that over long term they damage the body. And I'm thinking about, like we were talking in the example of the liquor. Obviously, changes behavior, changes body, everything, and that's obvious, right? Someone who's stone drunk, stumbling around a living room, you can see it. But we go to the mall, we go shopping, whatever. We're around people that are constantly, that we don't know, but they're hyped up on this stuff, right? Like, and that's what I mean by younger people who, may not have the experience to source things and kind of question certain things. If they feel the pressure,
ageism, man, I'm sure that middle-aged people are doing the same stuff.
Well, I'm just saying, if you're 19 and you're under stress because you're trying to get straight A's in some class, or you're 23 and you're trying to impress the boss, you're
trying to get this bonus for some kind of thing.
But I'm saying, when you're 50, you're already a little bit baked into your life. What I mean is the effect on people's relationships, interpersonal relationships, because they're hopped up on all this stuff, maybe on one part of the day, but on the other part of the day, they're dealing with the downside effects emotionally. So now they're cranky, they're pissed off, and that's what I mean. Like these things have all these
young men can't hold down relationships anymore in your mind.
Well, I'm going to give another plug for a show we did. No, but let me not. Sorry, audience. I'm definitely not that kind of salesman. But now, man, that's what I'm thinking, James. Is that it goes back to like the things like the microplastics and things. Those things are floating around, and we have no idea that we're breathing these things in. And what I realize is by being overhopped on caffeine, by an overprescribed over these different kind of drugs that are supposed to help us stay focused, or antidepressants, we're also walking around with all these chemicals in our brain. Like a lot of people probably don't remember who they are, or maybe not even know it if they've been using these things since they were teenagers or early 20s, and now they're our age, let's say. They might not really know who or remember who that person was because their brain chemistry is just different.
Yeah, it alters them. There's this altered state that they find. I mean, I think the efficacy piece is one of the more interesting things about caffeine also, though. And I did want to touch on that because like I've worked out, for the past, 25 years, I guess maybe even longer than that, really starting in high school. And I can actually, what's been really eye-opening for me is not just kind of the psychological piece, but since I started wearing one of the smartwatches, being able to see like my workouts and then looking at what I did before the workout. And so like, I can say like, and I always felt this, but I don't do my workouts around caffeine. Like I won't make sure I have some, I used to, my 30s or whatever, like there are things, guarana or something like that you have. But like, if I have caffeine, if I have a cup of coffee near when I decide to work out in the day, I can see the difference in terms of my heart rate and the calories burned and all that kind of stuff. So to me, that's why I'm like, I get it, from the standpoint, like you talk about, oh yeah, you drink and then you feel that effect. And then you kind of, if you want that again, you know where to go. I think the caffeine's the same kind of thing. Like you do the energy drink or drink a cup of coffee, and beyond the issue of withdrawal, which comes with any drug, you have the issue of the fact that you were, dragging a second ago, and now you're popped up, and so you remember that, and so it's like, the efficacy of these things means that the draw is always going to be there. I think what we'll have to look at, and what we have to make sure, and I want to ask you about this directly, but just to make the point, is that from a product standpoint, what's available, what people are allowed to sell, at least kind of in without the dire warning, maybe you got to put one of those cigarette label warnings on some certain energy drinks once they exceed a certain threshold of caffeine or something like that. It's the packaging of it, because we're going beyond the way nature could package it reasonably. And, great, people want to do that. That's fine. But you probably should let people know at a certain point. And so do you look at this as a regulatory issue? Or do you think this is something that people really just got to sort out for themselves? Like, and taking what I just said, as far as how kind of I kind of articulated the standard, but just in general, like, this stuff isn't going anywhere because it works, and people, you harm yourself potentially over the long term, but we don't make decisions oftentimes over what'll harm you in 5 years or 10 years or 30 years.
That's a very good way you put it, because honestly, the way you said that, it really accounts for the need for some sort of regulatory authority. And I hate to hear myself say that, because it's not all about regulation, but no, it's the idea, like you said, that because we're doing things to products that we purchase and ingest into our bodies, and when I say we're doing things, what I mean is industry is doing things to these products that make them much different than they would otherwise be in nature. And that's what I'm getting at. So the idea, think about like tobacco. Tobacco is a plant that comes out of the ground, just like marijuana. And people have been smoking both of those for thousands of years. But
even
when
with
industry
cigarettes, though, they'll add a bunch of additives.
That's what I'm getting at.
The nicotine hit harder.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. When industry got a hold of tobacco over the last 100 years, they put things that made more addictive, all that kind of stuff, right? Yep. Same is happening with marijuana. I'm reading articles that, to be careful about certain dispensaries, because where they source the marijuana plant, they plant them on farms that have, a lot of pesticides in them from a long time ago. Farms that were shut down for like agriculture to give us food, because they had DDT and stuff that's been banned in them.
Gosh.
And now they're growing marijuana plants that I might be
pulling
buying
out that DDT
and smoking DDT now, right?
Oh my God.
So, and that's my point, is saying, like, it's funny. One of my friends was over at my house and he saw my watch band from my iWatch, and he says to me, he goes, "Tunde, you sure you want to wear that band? I think it's got PFASs in it." And I looked at him, and we're smoking a joint. And I'm like, dude, you don't want to know about the article I just read about where this marijuana might have been grown in, because I think we're smoking a bunch of chemicals that's probably going to kill us way quicker than this watch band's going to kill me. So my point of him, Joe, and I'm thinking I was wearing a nylon shirt, and I was like, and look how many microplastics coming off. And let's not talk about when I brush my teeth and all the microplastics coming off the toothbrush. So it's enough to drive you crazy if you really think about it. And to the point we make sometimes in these shows, maybe we just throw our hands up and say, "Hey, someone fix this for me. I'm tired of this stuff." Right? It's too much coming at us. So, it's funny, James. That's why the kind of capitalist dude in me feels like I don't want to hear myself saying, "Yeah, we should regulate this." But as the way you set it up, saying, "Yeah, well, if industry is changing the nature of something like caffeine that naturally occurs in certain things, like a coffee bean." But they're shoving so much caffeine into something that it could cause, young people to have heart attacks and fatally die. I don't know. Should they be regulated or not? I don't know. What's the role of a government? I guess those are the questions we're going to be asking ourselves over the coming months.
To some degree, in some contexts, the government's job is to protect you from yourself. In other contexts, it's not,
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, this is all not new, but good questions we're going to have to ask ourselves.
I myself am partial to, like, now living through, part of this is the benefit of the age, but living through what happened with cigarettes and how they were everywhere and then they were very rare. Nowhere. Was like people used to smoke on airplanes, and I wasn't alive then. But
James, we're old enough to remember going to nightclubs when we were
of course, all the time.
And you would come home, your clothes would reek of
course. But living through that transition, but that change happened without them making cigarettes illegal. Yeah. And so to me, I have a lot of faith in the ability, if you have the right kind of person or the right kind of people in place that want to preserve liberty but want to help the public, which is not necessarily the combination that we've tried to get in leaders for whatever reason. But I think that it's very possible. If you between marketing and labeling, which is what the two things that they taxed the cigarette companies, or they had to pay settlements and so forth, but also they put taxes on them. They use that money to tell people about the risks and scare people, honestly. And then also they had the labeling saying, "Yeah, this thing will kill you right here." And between those two, you've seen a substantial drop. And then you see younger generations, they're like, that's not even their thing. It's just like, oh no, that's old people stuff. And so I think that it's very possible that for a society without curbing liberty to be able to, and I mean, and I wouldn't say this if I didn't see it with nicotine, but, or, and then obviously you will just have a bunch of caffeine patches at that point, but nonetheless, I think that it's very possible and that we should look at it and saying, hey, okay, let's take some of this money. You're going to sell anything that has more than blank amount of caffeine in it, then you're going to pay an extra tax. We're going to take that tax and we're going to tell people, hey, be careful. These things with X amount of caffeine, you're already getting caffeine from this. You're already getting caffeine from that. You drink this, you might have a heart attack, and then also put it on the label. Like, look, this has, this exceeds the amount of caffeine that of yada, yada, yada. Just do that. And then people will still buy it. Like, that's the thing. That's the other thing we learned is that, people want it. People that want it. And so I think that
still makes a lot of money. You're right.
Yeah. RJ Reynolds, Philip Morris, those dudes are still, they still living high, So I think that it's possible. I think that it's something that society should look at. I don't think there's a will for that right now, and then we can't agree on anything as a society right now. But generally speaking, we're probably just kind of in an ebb right now in terms of being able to accomplish things. I hope, Revenge of the Public suggested something different, but we'll see. I think it's possible. I think it's something that should be done, though, or should be looked at. But in a way, this doesn't rise to the idea of you should be looking at curbing people's liberty, though. It should just be about, hey, just make sure everybody here, you guys, you're making a lot of money on this. We'll take the money you make to make sure that people know what this can do to them.
Yeah, it's interesting, man, because as you're saying, I remember, man, we're old enough, and I'm just thinking like a young person today to walk in and see something like if someone 25 going into an office. I remember being a kid in the 80s. My mom used to work in downtown DC in, big office buildings. And as an elementary school kid going to see her after school or something, people were smoking cigarettes in cubicles. I remember being a kid in the 80s and they still had smoking sections on airplanes. Yeah. And I remember it was at the back of the plane. So I'd be sitting not all the way in the front, but
it wasn't all connected.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember looking back and seeing all this smoke and thinking like, Mom, I can smell it. And she's like, well, I thought we were in the no smoking section. And she's looking at me like, yeah,
no smoking sections of restaurants.
Yeah, but it's like that's what smoke does.
Yeah,
it goes in places.
Shocker.
So it's just funny, but you're right, James. I mean, it's a good reminder that in a relatively short period of time of 20, 30 years in a society, we've seen a lot of change. On a topic that is a big issue, right? Hundreds of millions of people smoke cigarettes. I mean, let's say tens of millions in America, but billions around the world. And a lot of, let's say, at least first world countries have really tailored and changed how they deal with cigarettes. And so we can make big changes, but I think these kind of conversations always are good because I feel like it allows the public to ask that open kind of rhetorical question, which is, what is the role of our government? And you're saying this tension
and also
between
to remember,
protecting
though, that our government
can
can accomplish stuff. We can. We got to put our minds to it, so to speak. But we can accomplish stuff. It's not like we just can't accomplish anything.
Do we trust ourselves more collectively as a people, or do we want to give all that trust to one man or one entity? That kind of thing. And that's the forever question.
I don't think you want to ask that question right now, man.
That means
I think people are putting a lot of faith in people's instincts these days, and
we'll do this one as a follow-up show.
But no, I think we can wrap this from there. We appreciate everybody for joining us on this episode of Call Like I See It. Subscribe to the podcast, rate it, review it, tell us what you think, send it to a friend. Until next time, I'm James Keys.
I'm Tunde Ogunlana.
All right, we'll talk soon.